Hi, I'm Natalie. I dragged my single suitcase through the sliding doors of Northfield International Airport and looked around desperately for my family. But when I finally spotted them at Gate 47, boarding passes in hand, my sister, Camilla, didn't even glance up from her phone before saying, "Oh, good, you made it. We figured you catch the next flight since there wasn't room anyway." And in that moment, I realized they had planned this Christmas trip to Aspen without me. Again. What they didn't know was that the private jet they'd see landing in 20 minutes was mine. And that was just the beginning. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The fluorescent lights of Northfield International cast everything in that sickly airport glow, the kind that makes even the healthiest person look like they're fighting off the flu. Christmas Eve, 6:47 p.m., and the terminal buzzed with that particular brand of holiday chaos. Families reuniting, couples arguing over gate changes, and the endless loop of silver bells playing overhead like some kind of psychological torture. I'd been running through this airport for the last 45 minutes, my leather boots clicking against the polished floors as I searched every gate, every restaurant, every corner where my family might be waiting. The text message from my mother, Diane, had been typically vague. Gate area near the food court. Flight boards at 7:15. Don't be late, sweetheart. No gate number, no airline, no details that might actually help someone navigate the maze of Concourse B during the busiest travel day of the year. My phone had been buzzing nonstop during the cab ride from downtown Riverside, where I'd been stuck in back-to-back client meetings until 5:30. December 24th should have been a light day, but when you're the youngest partner at Kelsworth & Associates, the oldest law firm in the city, you don't get to choose when international mergers decide to implode. I'd apologized to my assistant, Miranda, sent her home early with a bonus, and practically sprinted to the curb to catch the first available cab. The driver had taken one look at my frazzled expression and the garment bag draped over my arm and said, "Airport run on Christmas Eve? Someone's cutting it close." He wasn't wrong. I'd packed in 15 minutes flat, throwing ski clothes and evening wear into a suitcase while simultaneously returning calls from our London office. The Blackstone acquisition couldn't wait for the holidays, apparently. But this was supposed to be different. This was supposed to be the first Christmas in 3 years where I actually made it to the annual ski trip. Last year, I'd missed it because of the Morrison case. The year before, it was the Peterson divorce that kept me chained to my desk. This year, I'd sworn to Camilla that nothing would keep me away. "Promise me, Nat," she'd said over lunch at the Meridian Club 6 weeks ago. "Promise me you'll actually show up this time instead of sending some expensive gift as an apology." I promised. Now, as I finally spotted the familiar cluster of designer luggage and perfectly coordinated winter coats near Gate 47, I realized just how naive that promise had been. My family stood in a loose circle, checking boarding passes and passports with the casual efficiency of people who traveled together regularly. My mother, Diane Ashworth, looked exactly like what she was, a woman who'd never worked a day in her life but had perfected the art of managing other people's schedules. Her silver hair was pulled back in that effortless chignon that probably took her stylist an hour to achieve. And her cashmere coat was the exact shade of cream that made her look like she'd stepped out of a holiday catalog. My father, Richard, stood beside her in his navy blazer and perfectly pressed khakis, the uniform of a man who'd retired from Ashworth Industries at 55 and now spent his days managing their investment portfolio and his golf handicap. He was scrolling through his phone with the focused attention he usually reserved for stock reports, occasionally nodding at something my mother said without actually listening. But it was Camilla who stopped me in my tracks. My older sister stood at the center of the group like she always did, her honey blonde hair falling in perfect waves over her burgundy coat, coordinating the family's travel logistics with the authority of someone who'd never had to fight for her place at any table. She was holding what looked like boarding passes. Counting them, actually, while her husband Trevor stood beside her, their twin 8-year-old boys fidgeting nearby in matching navy peacoats. "6 passes," I heard her say to my mother as I approached, dragging my single black suitcase behind me. perfect count. The attendant said they're boarding first class in about 10 minutes. That's when it hit me. 6 passes. I stopped walking and did the math in my head. Camilla, Trevor, they're twins. That's 4. My parents, that's 6. 6 passes for 6 people. No mention of a 7th. I resumed walking, my heart beating faster with each step, telling myself I was miscounting or misunderstanding. Maybe Trevor's assistant had booked a separate ticket for me. Maybe there was some mix-up with the reservations. Maybe...
Oh, good, you made it. Camilla's voice cut through my internal panic as she finally looked up from the boarding passes. We figured you'd catch the next flight since there wasn't room anyway. The concierge at the Snow Lodge said they're pretty flexible with check-ins, so you probably won't lose the room if you arrive tomorrow morning instead. The words hit me like cold water. Next flight? No room? Tomorrow morning? I'm sorry, what? I managed, my voice sounding smaller than I intended. Trevor glanced up from his phone, offering me one of those polite smiles he'd perfected during his MBA program. Hey, Natalie. Yeah, bit of a booking snafu. The travel agent could only get 6 seats together, and we figured since you're always so busy with work anyway. He shrugged, as if my exclusion was simply a matter of logistics rather than choice. My mother turned then, her face brightening with that particular smile she used when she was about to deliver disappointing news wrapped in maternal warmth. Darling, you look exhausted. Maybe it's for the best. You could probably use a quiet Christmas at home to recharge. You've been working so hard lately. I specifically asked for time off. I cleared my entire schedule. I promised Camilla I'd be there. And you will be, Camilla said brightly, already turning back to organize the carry-on bags. Just a day later than planned. The slopes will still be there on the 26th, and honestly, the resort is probably less crowded after Christmas anyway. I stood there in the middle of Gate 47, surrounded by holiday travelers and the sound of departure announcements, watching my family prepare to board a flight to Colorado without me. The same family that had spent dinner last month guilt-tripping me about missing previous holidays, the same family that had made me promise to prioritize them over work for once. My father finally looked up from his phone. Natalie, sweetheart, you understand how these things work. The booking was made weeks ago, and by the time we realized you were serious about coming, the flight was full. It's peak season. I confirmed with Camilla 3 weeks ago, I said quietly. Did you? Camilla's eyebrows lifted slightly, as if she was genuinely trying to remember. I thought that was more of a tentative maybe situation. You know how you are with plans. How I was with plans, as if I was the flighty one in this family, as if I hadn't built my entire career on being the person who honored commitments and followed through on promises. The boarding announcement echoed through the terminal. Ladies and gentlemen, we're now boarding first-class passengers for United Flight 2847 to Denver with continuing service to Aspen. My family stirred into motion like a well-rehearsed dance. My mother gathered her Hermes purse and carry-on, my father pocketed his phone, and Trevor corralled the boys toward the boarding line. Camilla was already walking toward the gate agent, boarding passes fanned out in her manicured hand. Don't look so dramatic, Nat, she called over her shoulder. It's just one day. Besides, you'll probably get more rest at home anyway. You can catch up on all that work you're always talking about. And that's when I realized this wasn't about logistics or booking difficulties or last-minute changes. This was about them genuinely believing that my presence was optional, that I was the dispensable family member, the workaholic sister who'd probably cancel anyway, so why bother holding a seat? I watched them disappear down the jetway, their laughter and conversation fading into the ambient noise of the terminal. Not one of them looked back. What they didn't know, what none of them had bothered to ask about, was that while they were settling into their first-class seats on United Flight 2847 to Denver, my own aircraft was already beginning its descent into Northfield International, my jet. The Gulfstream G650 I'd purchased 18 months ago when the Kelsworth partnership had made me the youngest attorney in the firm's history to clear 8 figures in a single year. I pulled out my phone and opened the Flight Aware app, tracking the progress of N847KL. my call sign, my registration, my plane. 15 minutes out. Right on schedule.
The irony wasn't lost on me. I'd spent the last 5 years building something extraordinary, not just a legal career, but an empire. While Camilla was perfecting her role as the perfect wife and mother, attending charity luncheons and decorating her Westfield Hills mansion, I was closing deals that made headlines in the Financial Times. The Kelsworth partnership hadn't just made me wealthy, it had made me powerful in ways that even my father, with all his old money connections, couldn't fully comprehend. Richard Ashworth had built Ashworth Industries from a small manufacturing company into a regional powerhouse over 3 decades. It was respectable, solid, the kind of business that provided comfortable, upper-middle-class life for his family. But what I'd built in 5 years at Kelsworth dwarfed his lifetime's work. The merger and acquisition deals I'd orchestrated, the international partnerships I'd negotiated, they moved markets. They changed industries. Yet somehow, I was still the daughter who got left at the airport. I pulled out my phone and scrolled through the family group chat, something Camilla had created called Ashworth Adventures, complete with a snow emoji. The messages from the past hour painted a picture of casual disregard that was almost impressive in its completeness. Camilla, 3:42 p.m. Everyone confirmed for 7:15 flight, so excited for Snow Lodge this year. Mom, 3:45 p.m. Can't wait, weather looks perfect for skiing. Trevor, 4:10 p.m. Boys are packed and ready, thanks for organizing everything, Cam. Dad, 4:23 p.m. Looking forward to some R&R, see everyone at the gate. Camilla, 6:30 p.m. Gate 47, everyone, flight's on time. Not a single message mentioning me. Not one person asking if I'd made it to the airport, if I needed the gate number, if I was running late from work. It was as if they'd genuinely forgotten I existed until I showed up dragging my suitcase behind me. I walked slowly toward the floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out onto the tarmac, where ground crews were loading luggage and preparing aircraft for departure. The Snow Lodge. I knew it well, actually. Not from family trips, this would have been my first, but from the legal work I'd done for Meridian Hospitality Group last year. They owned a portfolio of luxury mountain resorts, including the Snow Lodge in Aspen, and I'd structured the acquisition deal that brought 3 Colorado properties into their holdings. The managing partner at Meridian, James Holloway, had been so impressed with my work that he'd offered me a standing invitation to any of their properties. "Anytime you need to get away from the city, Natalie," he'd said over dinner at the Capitol Grill, "consider yourself family." It was the kind of professional courtesy that came with handling 9-figure deals, but I'd never taken him up on it. I'd been too busy, too focused on the next case, the next client, the next victory. Now, watching planes taxi toward runways through the terminal windows, I realized that James Holloway had offered me more genuine warmth in a single business dinner than my actual family had shown me in months. My phone buzzed with a text from Miranda, my assistant, even though I'd sent her home hours ago. "Miranda, hope you made your flight. Merry Christmas, Miss Ashworth. You deserve some time off." I stared at the message for a long moment. My 24-year-old assistant, who'd known me for less than 2 years, had thought to check on my travel plans? She'd remembered that today was important to me, that I'd been talking about this family trip for weeks. She even stayed late yesterday to help me clear my schedule, working through lunch to reschedule meetings and push deadlines so I could have 4 uninterrupted days in Colorado. The contrast was staggering. I typed back, "Flight situation changed. Enjoy your holiday." Her response came immediately. "Everything okay? Do you need me to book anything?" Even on Christmas Eve, from her own family gathering, Miranda was offering to help me solve my problems. Meanwhile, my sister couldn't be bothered to save me a seat on a plane. The truth was, I'd been funding family vacations for years without thinking much about it. When my parents wanted to upgrade to first-class tickets, I quietly covered the difference. When Camilla's husband Trevor had been between jobs 2 years ago and they couldn't afford their usual Christmas trip, I paid for the entire week at a luxury resort in Jackson Hole, telling them it was my Christmas gift to the family. When my parents' investment portfolio took a hit during the market volatility last spring, I discreetly transferred enough money to their account to cover their lifestyle for the next decade. But somehow, none of that translated into basic consideration. None of it earned me a seat at their table, literally. I'd always told myself that I didn't mind being the family ATM. Money was just a tool, and if it could buy happiness for the people I loved, then it was money well spent. But standing in this airport terminal, watching my family's plane push back from the gate through the massive windows, I realized that I'd been buying something else entirely. I'd been buying the illusion of belonging. The reality was that they saw me as Natalie the checkbook, not Natalie the sister, the successful lawyer who could fix financial problems and fund adventures, but wasn't actually necessary for the adventures themselves. I was infrastructure, not family. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed a number I didn't recognize, but the area code was local.
Ms. Ashworth? The voice was professional, crisp. This is Captain Rodriguez from Pinnacle Aviation Services. We're showing your aircraft on final approach to Northfield International. Are you ready for departure to Aspen Regional? I closed my eyes for a moment, feeling something shift inside my chest. Not sadness, I was past that. Not anger exactly, though there was some of that too. It was something cleaner, sharper. Clarity. Yes, Captain, I said, my voice steady. I'm ready. Perfect. We'll have you on the ground in about 12 minutes. Ground transportation will meet you at the private terminal to transfer you and your luggage. Flight time to Aspen is approximately 90 minutes. 90 minutes! While my family was settling in for a 3.5-hour commercial flight with a layover in Denver, dealing with holiday crowds and delayed connections, I'd be landing at the same destination in half the time, in comfort, in privacy, in my own aircraft. Thank you, Captain. I'll head to the private terminal now. I ended the call and looked around the crowded commercial terminal one more time. Families rushing toward gates, children crying, adults arguing over seating arrangements and baggage fees, all the chaos and indignity that my family was about to endure for the next several hours. I pulled the handle up on my suitcase and began walking toward the exit, following the signs for ground transportation. But instead of heading toward the taxi stand or rental car counter, I followed the smaller, more discreet signs toward the private aviation terminal. It was time to remind my family that the daughter they'd left behind wasn't the same person they thought they knew. The private aviation terminal at Northfield International existed in a different universe from the chaos I'd just left behind. Where the main terminal buzzed with the frantic energy of holiday travel, this space whispered luxury and discretion. Marble floors reflected soft lighting, leather seating areas were arranged around floor-to-ceiling windows, and the only sounds were the gentle hum of climate control and the occasional murmur of well-dressed travelers speaking in hushed tones. I approached the reception desk where a woman in a crisp navy blazer looked up with the kind of professional smile reserved for people who owned, rather than rented, their aircraft. "Miss Ashworth," she said before I could introduce myself. "Welcome back to Pinnacle Services. Captain Rodriguez called ahead. Your aircraft is on final approach. Would you like to wait in the Platinum Lounge, or shall we escort you directly to the tarmac?" "The lounge is fine," I said, noting how different this reception felt from the chaos at the commercial gates. Here, I wasn't Natalie the afterthought. I was Miss Ashworth, valued client, aircraft owner, someone whose time and comfort mattered. A young man in a similar Navy uniform appeared as if summoned. "I'll handle your luggage transfer, Miss Ashworth. The crew has your usual catering preferences on board, and Captain Rodriguez confirmed your flight plan to Aspen Regional with an arrival time of 10:47 p.m. Mountain Time." My usual catering preferences. I'd only used the jet a handful of times in the 18 months since I'd purchased it, but somehow they remembered that I preferred sparkling water to champagne, that I was allergic to shellfish, that I liked my coffee black. The level of attention to detail was staggering, and it was the exact opposite of what I'd experienced with my own family 20 minutes earlier. I settled into one of the leather armchairs facing the tarmac and pulled out my phone. The family group chat was active during my walk from the main terminal. Camilla, 7:28 p.m. Ugh, delayed 30 minutes on the tarmac. Holiday travel is the worst. Trevor, 7:30 p.m. Boys are getting restless. At least we're in first class. Mom, 7:32 p.m. The flight attendant said it's weather-related. Could be longer. Dad, 7:35 p.m. Should have taken the corporate jet. Oh, wait. We sold that years ago. Camilla, 7:36 p.m. LOL, Dad. Maybe Natalie can buy us one with all that lawyer money she's always bragging about. I stared at that last message for a long moment. Lawyer money she's always bragging about. When did I ever brag about money? I'd never even told them about most of my major cases, partly out of professional discretion, and partly because I'd learned that success made family dinners uncomfortable. When I'd mentioned the Blackstone acquisition last month, a deal that made international headlines, Camilla had rolled her eyes and changed the subject to her twins' soccer schedule. But apparently, my financial success was a running joke in the family chat, something to laugh about while they sat in first-class seats that I'd unknowingly subsidized through years of Christmas gifts and family contributions. I was about to put my phone away when a new message appeared. Trevor, 7:41 p.m. Wait, seriously though, where did Natalie end up? Did she get on a different flight? Finally, someone had noticed I wasn't accounted for. Camilla, 7:42 p.m. She'll figure it out. She's good at that stuff. Probably already booked herself something fancy knowing her. Mom, 7:43 p.m. I'm sure she's fine, dear. Natalie is very capable. Dad, 7:44 p.m. She might even beat us there if she found a direct flight. The casual dismissal was breathtaking. Not concern, not guilt, not even curiosity about whether I was stranded or upset. Just the bland assumption that I would figure it out because I was capable. As if being capable excused them from basic human consideration.
I typed and deleted several responses. I wanted to tell them exactly what I thought of their casual cruelty. I wanted to explain how it felt to be excluded from a family trip I'd essentially funded. I wanted to demand an apology, an explanation, some acknowledgement that they'd hurt me. Instead, I typed, "Don't worry about me. I'll see you in Aspen." It was true, after all, just not in the way they expected. Through the floor-to-ceiling windows, I watched my Gulfstream G650 touch down on the runway with the grace of a machine that cost more than most people's houses. The deep blue and silver paint scheme caught the airport lights as it taxied toward the private terminal, and I felt something shift in my chest. Not quite satisfaction, that would come later. This was something calmer, more resolute. "Miss Ashworth?" The woman from the reception desk appeared beside my chair. "Your aircraft is ready for boarding. Captain Rodriguez would like to speak with you briefly about the weather conditions en route." I followed her through a set of glass doors that led directly onto the tarmac. The December air was crisp, but not bitter, and the sound of jet engines in the distance provided a steady backdrop to the controlled chaos of the private aviation ramp. My Gulfstream sat gleaming under the floodlights, its stairs lowered, a subtle blue glow emanating from the cabin windows. Captain Rodriguez met me at the base of the stairs. He was a former Air Force pilot I'd personally recruited after my previous captain had retired, and his attention to detail was legendary in the private aviation community. "Good evening, Miss Ashworth." He extended his hand. "Beautiful night for flying. We've got clear skies most of the way to Colorado, just some light chop over the Rockies. Flight time should be about 85 minutes. "Any issues with the Aspen approach tonight?" I asked, genuinely curious. Aspen Regional was notoriously challenging, carved into a narrow valley surrounded by 14,000-foot peaks. "None at all. Tower's reporting good visibility and light winds. We'll have you on the ground well before the commercial traffic starts backing up for the holiday rush." As if on cue, my phone buzzed with another group chat update. "Camilla, 7:52 p.m. Now they're saying another hour delay. This is ridiculous." Trevor, 7:53 p.m. "Should have left earlier. Holiday travel always sucks." Mom, 7:54 p.m. "At least we're not in coach with the screaming babies." I showed the message to Captain Rodriguez, who raised an eyebrow. "Commercial delays?" "My family's flight," I said simply. "They're going to the same destination." He nodded with the professional discretion that came with flying high-net-worth individuals who often had complicated family dynamics. Well, you'll be checking into your hotel while they're still sitting on the tarmac. Shall we get started? I climbed the stairs into the cabin, leaving behind the world where I was an afterthought, a backup plan, a convenient source of funding, but not a valued family member. The interior of the Gulfstream embraced me like a sanctuary. Cream leather seats, burled walnut trim, and that particular silence that only comes with truly superior engineering and soundproofing. My phone buzzed one more time as I settled into my usual seat, the one facing forward on the left side, positioned perfectly for working or sleeping, depending on the flight length. Trevor, 8:01 p.m. Update: they're boarding now, but saying the delay means we'll miss our Denver connection. Might not get to Aspen until tomorrow afternoon. Camilla, 8:02 p.m. Are you kidding me? This is supposed to be our Christmas vacation. Dad, 8:03 p.m. Should have booked direct flights. Too late now. Mom, 8:04 p.m. Well, at least we'll get there eventually. Poor Natalie is probably dealing with the same mess on whatever flight she managed. Poor Natalie. The phrase almost made me laugh. Poor Natalie, who would be landing in Aspen in less than 2 hours while they spent the night in a Denver airport hotel. Poor Natalie, who owned the kind of aircraft that heads of state borrowed for international trips. Poor Natalie, who just realized that she had been fundamentally misunderstanding her role in this family for years. I buckled my seatbelt as Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the cabin speakers. Ms. Ashworth, we're cleared for departure. Wheels up in about 3 minutes. Through the oval window, I could see the main terminal in the distance, where my family was presumably still sitting on an airplane that was going nowhere fast. The contrast wasn't lost on me. While they dealt with the indignities of commercial travel, the delays, the connections, the crowds, the chaos, I would arrive in Aspen, refreshed, ahead of schedule, and ready to enjoy a Christmas vacation that they'd made clear I wasn't really wanted on anyway. But here's what they didn't know. I wasn't just going to show up in Aspen. I was going to show up at their hotel, at their dinner reservations, at their ski mountain. I was going to be everywhere they thought I wouldn't be, doing everything they assumed I couldn't do, with a level of ease and comfort that would make their commercial airline struggles look exactly as petty and small as they actually were. The engine spooled up, and I felt the familiar sensation of acceleration as we rolled toward the runway. In about 2 hours, my family would still be sitting in whatever airport hotel Denver had shuffled them into, wondering why their perfectly planned Christmas vacation had fallen apart. What they would learn, what I was about to teach them, was that when you treat someone like they're dispensable, you might discover that you're the one who's been disposable all along. The Gulfstream lifted off into the crisp December night, carrying me toward a confrontation that had been years in the making. At 35,000 feet, cruising over the heartland of America, I finally allowed myself to process what had just happened. The cabin was quiet except for the gentle hum of the engines, and through the window the lights of small towns scattered across the landscape like fallen stars. Captain Rodriguez had dimmed the interior lighting to a warm amber glow, and I'd declined his offer of dinner, opting instead for sparkling water and the chance to think without interruption. What my family didn't know, what they had somehow never bothered to learn despite 5 years of evidence, was exactly who I'd become since graduating from Columbia Law School. To them, I was still the studious younger daughter who chose books over parties, the one who worked too hard and socialized too little. They saw the expensive gifts I gave, the financial help I provided, but they'd never connected those dots to understand the magnitude of what I'd built. The truth was that Natalie Ashworth wasn't just a successful lawyer. I was the Natalie Ashworth who had restructured the Blackstone Industries merger, a deal that had made front-page news in the Wall Street Journal for 3 consecutive days. I was the attorney who had negotiated the Meridian Hospitality acquisition that brought 17 luxury resorts under one umbrella. I was the woman who had single-handedly prevented the collapse of Hartwell Pharmaceuticals, saving 12,000 jobs and earning a personal thank you call from the governor of Connecticut. But more than that, I was the family's invisible benefactor in ways that went far beyond Christmas gifts and vacation upgrades.
2 years ago, when my father's beloved Ashworth Industries had faced a hostile takeover from a conglomerate that planned to strip it for parts and eliminate jobs, I had been the one to orchestrate its salvation. Not openly. That would have wounded his pride irreparably. Instead, I had worked through intermediaries, shell companies, and legal structures so complex that even he didn't fully understand them. The white knight investor who had swooped in to purchase controlling interest and keep the company intact, that was me. The mysterious benefactor who had insisted on retaining all existing employees and management structure, me again. Richard Ashworth thought he had saved his company through shrewd negotiation and business acumen. What he had actually done was accept a buyout offer from his own daughter, who now technically owned the business that had defined his entire adult life. The monthly dividend checks he received as former owner compensation were actually allowance payments I sent him to maintain his dignity and lifestyle. He didn't know. None of them knew. When Camilla and Trevor were house hunting in Westfield Hills 3 years ago, lamenting that they were priced out of the neighborhood where she'd always dreamed of raising her children, I had been the one to make it happen. Not through a family loan or a generous gift that would have created awkward dynamics and ongoing obligations. Instead, I had purchased the house they wanted through a property investment company I owned, then structured a lease-to-own arrangement so favorable that their monthly payments barely covered the property taxes. They thought they had found an incredible deal through Trevor's realtor connections. They thought they were savvy negotiators who had talked a motivated seller down to an unreasonable price. They were living in a house I owned, paying rent to a company I controlled, building equity in a property I had gifted them without their knowledge. The vacation home in the Hamptons where we'd spent last summer's family reunion, mine. Purchased the week after Camilla had mentioned how much she missed the summers we'd spent there as children before my parents had been forced to sell it during the recession. I'd bought it back from the family that had owned it for 15 years, paying significantly over market value to convince them to sell. Now it sat in a trust that would eventually transfer to my parents, though they believed they were simply renting it from friends of friends who gave them an excellent rate. Even their financial security was an illusion I maintained. My mother's investment portfolio, which she managed with such pride and which had performed suspiciously well during the market volatility of the past 2 years, I had been quietly stabilizing it through strategic transactions, using my connections in the financial world to ensure that her retirement remained comfortable regardless of market conditions. The lucky stock picks that had made her feel like a savvy investor, I had been providing insider knowledge through carefully worded conversations about my legal work, dropping hints about which companies are positioning for growth based on deals I was negotiating. My father's golf club membership at Pinehurst, the one he bragged about to his friends, I had purchased the membership and arranged for it to be gifted to him anonymously by a grateful client of the company he thought he still owned. The annual fees were automatically deducted from accounts I controlled. The boys' private school tuition at Riverside Academy, which Camilla and Trevor somehow managed to afford despite Trevor's inconsistent income from his consulting business, I had been supporting their entire lifestyle for years, maintaining the fiction that they were financially independent while actually serving as their invisible patron. Every comfort they enjoyed, every security they took for granted, every opportunity that had conveniently fallen into their laps, it all traced back to me. And somehow, despite all of that, I was still the family afterthought. The workaholic daughter who was too busy to prioritize family. The sister who sent money instead of showing up. I pulled out my laptop and opened the secure folder where I kept documentation of all these arrangements. Bank statements, property records, trust documents, corporate filings, a paper trail that told the complete story of my family's financial dependence on someone they apparently viewed as dispensable. It was all legal, all carefully structured, all designed to provide support while preserving their dignity and independence. Looking at these documents now, I realized that I had been enabling their dismissal of me. By making their lives comfortable while remaining invisible, I had allowed them to believe that their success was entirely their own. They had no idea how precarious their situation actually was, how quickly their comfortable world could crumble if I decided to stop subsidizing it. The jet phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. Captain Rodriguez's voice came through the cabin speakers. Ms. Ashworth, we're beginning our descent into Aspen. Ground control is showing excellent conditions. Clear skies, light winds, temperature 32 degrees. We'll have you on the ground in about 15 minutes. I closed the laptop and opened the window. The Rocky Mountains rose around us like ancient sentinels, their snow-covered peaks gleaming silver in the moonlight. Somewhere below, the Snow Lodge nestled in the valley, waiting for guests who had arrived in comfort and style rather than after a night spent sleeping on airport benches in Denver. My phone showed several new messages in the family group chat. Camilla, 9:47 p.m. Officially stranded in Denver overnight. Hotel vouchers, but the shuttle doesn't run until 6 a.m. Trevor, 9:48 p.m. This is a disaster. Boys are exhausted and cranky. Mom, well, at least we're all together. That's what matters. Dad, 9:55 p.m. Should arrive in Aspen around 2 p.m. tomorrow if the connection works out. Camilla, 9:58 p.m. There goes our first day on the slopes. I'm so frustrated I could cry. All together. That's what matters. The irony was almost poetic. They were all together in their misery, comforting each other through a travel disaster that could have completely been avoided if they had simply included me in their planning, if they had treated me like family instead of like an inconvenience. Instead, they were spending Christmas Eve on cots in an airport hotel, while I prepared to land at their mutual destination in a level of comfort they couldn't even imagine. I typed a message into the group chat. Just landed in Aspen, beautiful night here. See you when you arrive. Then I powered off my phone, not waiting to see their responses. Let them wonder how I had managed to get to Colorado so quickly. Let them puzzle over the logistics of a same-day flight from Northfield to Aspen on Christmas Eve. Let them begin to question their assumptions about who I was and what I was capable of. The Gulfstream touched down at Aspen Regional Airport with barely a bump, and as we taxied toward the private aviation terminal, I could see the Snow Lodge's shuttle waiting for me, a luxury SUV with heated leather seats and a driver who would know exactly who I was and why I mattered. Tomorrow, my family would arrive tired, frustrated, and behind schedule. They would check into a resort that I had helped acquire, pay for amenities with money I had indirectly provided, and enjoy a vacation in a location where I was not just a guest, but practically family to the ownership group. And they would finally begin to understand that the daughter they had left at the airport wasn't the same person they thought they knew. The Snow Lodge at midnight felt like stepping into a winter fairy tale. Crystal chandeliers cast warm light across timber beams and stone fireplaces, while floor-to-ceiling windows revealed snow-dusted pines silhouetted against the starlit sky. The lobby hummed with the quiet energy of Christmas Eve, guests in cashmere and silk returning from late dinners, the soft chime of the concierge bell, and the gentle crackle of fires burning in massive hearths. I approached the front desk where a young woman in an elegant burgundy blazer looked up with the kind of professional warmth that comes with managing high-end hospitality. Her name tag read, Jessica, Guest Relations.
Absolutely, Miss Ashworth. Would you like me to coordinate any joint activities or dining reservations? Not just yet. I'd prefer to surprise them. She nodded with the practiced discretion of someone accustomed to wealthy families and their complicated dynamics. Of course. Is there anything else I can arrange for you this evening? Actually, yes. Could you tell me about the resort's ownership structure? I'm curious about the management company. Jessica's eyebrows rose slightly, but she maintained her professional composure. The Snow Lodge is part of the Meridian Hospitality Group portfolio. They acquired us last year in a significant expansion of their luxury mountain properties. The transition has been wonderful. They've invested heavily in improvements while maintaining our character. Meridian Hospitality, I repeated as if the name was unfamiliar. Interesting. Well, I'm sure I'll enjoy my stay.
What Jessica didn't know was that I had personally structured the acquisition deal that brought the Snow Lodge under Meridian's control. I had spent 3 months negotiating the terms, ensuring that existing staff would be retained, that the property's historic character would be preserved, and that the new ownership would maintain the highest standards of luxury service. James Holloway, Meridian's managing partner, had been so impressed with my work that he'd insisted on naming me to the property's advisory board, a largely ceremonial position that came with permanent VIP status at any Meridian property. The elevator carried me to the penthouse level, where double doors opened onto a suite that commanded breathtaking views of the Aspen Valley. Floor-to-ceiling windows revealed the snow-covered ski slopes that would soon be crawling with holiday tourists, including my family. A bottle of Dom Perignon waited in an ice bucket beside a handwritten note from the general manager welcoming me back to the property. I poured myself a glass of champagne and settled into one of the leather armchairs facing the window. My phone showed a steady stream of updates from the family group chat, each message painting a clearer picture of their increasingly miserable travel experience. Trevor, 11:23 p.m. Airport hotel is exactly as expected. Vending machine dinner for everyone. Camilla, 11:31 p.m. Boys finally asleep, but on cots that are basically torture devices. This whole trip is ruined. Mom, 11:45 p.m. Trying to stay positive, but this is not how I imagine spending Christmas Eve. Dad, 11:52 p.m. Flight tomorrow is showing on time, but after today, I'm not holding my breath. Camilla, 12:07 a.m. Officially Christmas morning, and we're stranded in an airport. Merry Christmas to us, I guess. The bitterness in Camilla's messages was palpable, and I found myself almost feeling sorry for them. Almost. But then I remembered the casual cruelty of being left at the gate, the dismissive assumption that I would figure it out, the years of being treated like a convenient ATM rather than a family member. I opened my laptop and pulled up the Snow Lodge's guest services system, a perk of my advisory board position that gave me access to certain management functions. A few clicks revealed my family's reservation details, and what I saw there made me pause. They had booked the basic Mountain View rooms, not the luxury suites. They had declined the premium dining package, opting instead for standard meal plans. They even passed on the complimentary ski equipment rental that came with higher-tier bookings. For a family that I knew was essentially living on my subsidies, they were certainly committed to maintaining the illusion of independent finances. But here was the interesting part. Their reservation had been flagged for potential upgrade due to seasonal availability and guest satisfaction protocols. The system was automatically recommending that they be moved to better rooms and given access to premium amenities, standard practice for managing holiday bookings and ensuring positive reviews. I made a note in their file declining the automatic upgrades. If they wanted to maintain the fiction that they were independent travelers who didn't need help from their wealthy family member, then they could enjoy the full experience of their budget-conscious choices. My phone rang, startling me from my research. The caller ID showed James Holloway's direct line. "Natalie," his warm voice filled the suite. "I hope Jessica took good care of you at check-in?" "She was wonderful, as always. Thank you for the champagne." "My pleasure. I wanted to personally ensure everything was perfect for your Christmas day. I know how important family time is, especially for someone who works as hard as you do." If only he knew. "Actually, James, my family will be arriving tomorrow afternoon. They don't know about my connection to the property. I prefer to keep it that way." "Of course! Discretion is our specialty. Though I have to ask, should we treat them as VIP guests given your relationship with the property?" I paused, considering the question. Part of me wanted to say yes, to ensure they had the best possible experience despite how they'd treated me. But another part, the part that was still stinging from being abandoned at an airport, had a different idea.
Let them experience the resort exactly as they've booked it. No special treatment unless they specifically request upgrades and are willing to pay for them. Understood. And if they ask about the management or ownership structure, answer honestly. Don't volunteer information, but don't hide anything either.
After ending the call, I walked to the window and looked down at the village below. Even at this late hour, I could see people moving between the shops and restaurants, couples walking hand in hand through the snow, families heading back to their hotels after late Christmas Eve dinners. All of them here for the same reason my family had planned this trip: to create memories, to bond, to celebrate the holiday together. The irony wasn't lost on me. I was in the most beautiful suite at one of the most exclusive resorts in Colorado, with access to every luxury and amenity imaginable, and I had never felt more alone. My family was huddled together in an airport hotel, miserable but united in their misery, while I sat in isolated comfort, waiting to spring a trap I wasn't even sure I wanted to set. My phone buzzed with a new message, but this one wasn't from the family group chat. It was from Miranda, my assistant. Miranda: "Merry Christmas, Miss Ashworth. Hope you're having a wonderful time with your family. You deserve all the happiness in the world." I stared at the message for a long moment. Miranda, who had never met my family, who knew me only through work, had taken time on Christmas morning to send me warm wishes. Meanwhile, my own family hadn't bothered to check if I'd made it to a hotel safely, if I was spending Christmas Eve alone, or if I needed any help with my travel situation. The contrast was stark and painful. I walked to the suite's private balcony and stepped outside. The mountain air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of snow and pine. The silence was profound. No traffic, no sirens, no urban chaos. Just the vast peace of the mountains and the weight of decisions I wasn't sure I was ready to make. Tomorrow, my family would arrive, tired, frustrated, and completely unaware that they were entering territory where I held all the cards. They would check into rooms I could have upgraded with a phone call. They would eat at restaurants where I was essentially family to the ownership. They would ski on mountains where my business relationships had helped secure some of the best terrain access in Colorado. And they would still have no idea who I really was or what I had done for them over the years. The question was, what did I want them to learn? And how much was I willing to reveal to teach them? The power to control their experience here was intoxicating, but it also felt dangerous. I had never used my wealth as a weapon before, and I wasn't sure I wanted to start now. But as I stood on that balcony, looking out at a landscape that represented everything they thought they were entitled to, and everything I had actually earned, I realized that the choice might not be entirely mine to make. Some lessons can only be taught when the student is ready to learn, and some truths can only be revealed when the consequences of ignorance become too painful to ignore. Tomorrow would bring answers to questions I wasn't sure I was ready to ask. Christmas morning arrived with the kind of pristine mountain beauty that resort brochures spent millions trying to capture. Fresh snow had fallen overnight, dusting the pine trees and ski slopes with powder that caught the early sunlight like scattered diamonds. I stood on my balcony with coffee that had been delivered by room service, not because I'd requested it, but because the concierge staff knew my preferences from previous visits. My family, according to their increasingly frustrated group chat messages, was dealing with a very different Christmas morning. Dad, 6:42 a.m. Airport shuttle delayed. Flight now pushed to 3 p.m. Camilla, 6:58 a.m. I can't even anymore. The boys are asking why Santa couldn't find them in the hotel. Trevor, 7:15 a.m. This is officially the worst Christmas ever. Mom, 7:23 a.m. Let's just focus on getting there. We'll make the best of it. Camilla, 7:31 a.m. At this rate, we'll arrive after dinner. There goes another day of our vacation. I sipped my coffee and considered my options. Part of me wanted to reach out, to offer solutions. I could arrange for a private charter to get them out of Denver immediately. I could have the resort extend their stay to compensate for the lost time. I could fix their problem with a single phone call. But something held me back.
Maybe it was the memory of standing abandoned at gate 47, or the casual way they'd assumed I would figure it out on my own. Maybe it was the years of being treated like a convenient solution to problems rather than a person worthy of consideration. Or maybe it was what I discovered when I decided to do some investigating of my own. I opened my laptop and logged into the secure portal that managed my various business and investment accounts. If I was going to have a confrontation with my family about their treatment of me, I wanted to understand exactly how deep their dependence on my financial support actually ran. What I found was even more extensive than I had remembered.
The Ashworth Industries buyout hadn't been a one-time transaction. Over the past 18 months, I had been systematically purchasing additional shares from minority investors, restructuring debt, and providing capital infusions to keep the company competitive. What started as saving my father's business had evolved into completely modernizing it. The mysterious investor hadn't just prevented a hostile takeover. I had transformed a regional manufacturing company into a technology leader in industrial automation. The quarterly reports showed revenue growth of 340% since my acquisition. Employment had expanded from 180 to nearly 400 workers. The company had opened 2 new facilities and acquired 3 smaller competitors. My father thought he was managing a successful turnaround. What he was actually doing was serving as the figurehead for an operation I was running remotely through a network of consultants and advisors. But here was the part that truly shocked me. According to the financial records, my father had been taking credit for this transformation. Not just internally, but publicly. He had been featured in Industry Weekly magazine as Entrepreneur of the Year. He had given keynote speeches at manufacturing conferences about innovative leadership in challenging times. He had even been interviewed on the local business television program about his visionary approach to corporate restructuring. He was building a reputation as a business genius based on decisions I was making from my law office in Manhattan. I scrolled through news articles and found photographs of my father accepting awards, shaking hands with politicians, cutting ribbons at the new facilities I had funded. In every interview, he spoke confidently about his strategic vision, his bold investment choices, and his commitment to workforce development. There was no mention of outside investors, no acknowledgement of the financial backing that made any of it possible. He had somehow convinced himself and everyone else that his success was entirely self-generated. The pattern extended beyond the business. I pulled up the property records for their primary residence and discovered that my parents had been telling neighbors and friends that they had paid off their mortgage early through smart financial planning. The reality was that I had purchased the note from their bank and forgiven the debt, but somehow this had been transformed in family mythology into my father's fiscal responsibility. The Hampton House showed a similar pattern. They were telling people they had reconnected with old friends who gave them access to the property. The old friend's story had become so elaborate that my mother had actually created fictional backstories for these imaginary benefactors, complete with names and professions. Even Camilla and Trevor were participating in the fiction. Their social media accounts showed them hosting dinner parties in their dream home, which they described as the result of Trevor's successful consulting business and their careful saving. There were posts about their children's private school achievements, with grateful mentions of the merit scholarship that made it possible. Trevor had even started a blog about financial independence for young families, sharing advice about investment strategies that were actually just descriptions of the portfolio management I was providing through trust funds he didn't know existed. But here was the part that truly shocked me. According to the financial records, the booking for this very trip hadn't been made by any of them directly. It had been arranged through a concierge service that charged a substantial premium for securing holiday accommodations at exclusive resorts. The fees for this service, nearly $3,000 just for the booking assistance, had been paid from an account that I ultimately funded through the maze of trusts and transfers that supported their lifestyle.
They were paying someone else to spend my money to book a vacation they thought they were treating me generously by allowing me to potentially join. The irony was staggering. I was funding a trip that they had excluded me from, using money they believed they had earned independently to stay at a resort where I was treated like royalty because of my business relationships and property ownership connections. I closed the laptop and walked back to the window. The ski slopes were beginning to fill with the first wave of Christmas morning enthusiasts, families and couples excited to spend the holiday doing what they loved most. It should have been a beautiful scene, but all I could think about was the elaborate web of deception my family had constructed around their own financial reality. The most painful part wasn't the money. I could afford to support them indefinitely, and I had done so willingly because I loved them and wanted them to be happy. The painful part was the realization that they had created an entire mythology around their independence and success that required my complete invisibility. They didn't just dismiss my contributions, they had actively erased them from their personal narratives. In their version of the story, they were self-made success stories who had achieved comfortable upper-middle-class lives through hard work and smart choices. I was the eccentric younger daughter who worked too much and sent expensive gifts because she felt guilty about missing family events. The truth was that without my constant invisible support, their entire lifestyle would collapse within months. The house, the tuition, the vacation funds, the business success, the investment portfolio, all of it was a carefully maintained illusion that I had been enabling for years. And they had no idea. My phone rang, interrupting my thoughts. The caller ID showed the main desk.
Ms. Ashworth, this is Jessica from Guest Relations. I wanted to update you on your family's arrival status. Their flight has been delayed again, and they're now not expected to land until after 4 p.m. Would you like me to adjust any of the arrangements we've discussed? No changes, I said. Let them check in exactly as they've booked. Of course. Also, I should mention that Mr. Holloway has asked if you'd be available for a brief meeting this afternoon. Nothing urgent, just some updates on the property management transition that he thought might interest you. A meeting with James Holloway while my family was checking in. The timing was almost too perfect. What time were you thinking? He suggested 4:30 in the executive conference room. It overlooks the main lobby, so you'd have a clear view of guest arrivals. I smiled for the first time since arriving in Colorado. That sounds perfect. After ending the call, I realized that I didn't need to orchestrate a confrontation with my family. I didn't need to plan some elaborate revelation or dramatic scene. All I needed to do was let them discover the truth for themselves. They thought they were arriving at a resort where they were paying guests like everyone else. What they would find was a property where their youngest family member was treated like visiting royalty, where staff members knew me by name and anticipated my needs, where the management took personal interest in my comfort and satisfaction. The collision between their assumptions and reality would be education enough. All I had to do was be myself in my own element and let them wonder how the daughter they'd abandoned at an airport had somehow arrived ahead of them in a world where she was clearly more than just another guest. The afternoon hours crawled by with the deliberate pace of someone preparing for a performance they'd been rehearsing their entire life without knowing it. I spent the time doing exactly what I would normally do at any luxury resort, enjoying the amenities I'd helped design and implement through my work with Meridian Hospitality. I started with the spa, where the manager, Sophia, greeted me like an old friend. She remembered my preference for deep tissue massage and my allergy to lavender-based oils. She didn't remember these details because I was a frequent guest. I'd only been to this property twice before. She remembered because the staff training protocols I'd helped develop emphasized personalized service for advisory board members and VIP guests. Ms. Ashworth, how wonderful to see you again. Sophia led me to the private treatment suite that overlooked the snow-covered peaks. The usual Swedish massage with eucalyptus oils? Perfect, I said, settling into the robe that had been warmed specifically for my arrival. And Sophia, my family will be arriving later today. They don't know about my connection to the property, so I'd appreciate your discretion.
Her eyebrows raised slightly, but her professionalism never wavered. Of course. Will they be joining you for any spa services? They haven't booked anything yet. If they do, please treat them exactly like any other guests, no special considerations. After the massage, I made my way to the resort's private ski concierge, where Marcus, not to be confused with my former business partner, managed equipment and slope access for VIP guests. The Snow Lodge owned several private trail easements that weren't available to the general public, and Marcus controlled access to the best powder runs on the mountain. Ms. Ashworth, he pulled my custom-fitted skis from the VIP storage area. Perfect timing. We got 8 inches of fresh snow last night. The back bowls are pristine. I spent 2 hours skiing runs that most guests would never see, trails that had been developed specifically for Meridian's premium properties. The solitude was perfect for thinking, for preparing mentally for what was about to unfold when my family arrived. Each turn down the mountain felt like shedding another layer of the person they thought they knew, revealing someone they'd never bothered to discover. By 3:30 p.m., I was showered and dressed in the kind of understated luxury that wealth whispers rather than shouts. Cashmere sweater, tailored wool pants, boots that cost more than most people's monthly rent but looked effortlessly simple. I made my way to the executive conference room where James Holloway was waiting with property reports and a view that perfectly framed the main lobby below. Natalie, James stood to greet me. His silver hair and tailored suit reflected the kind of success that came from building rather than inheriting. Wealth. Thank you for making time. I know this is supposed to be a family vacation. It's complicated, I said, accepting the chair he offered. But I appreciate the update meeting. How is the transition going? James opened a leather portfolio filled with financial reports and guest satisfaction surveys. Exceptionally well. The staff retention has been perfect. No one wanted to leave after the acquisition. Guest ratings are up 18% from last year, and the capital improvements you suggested during the due diligence have increased revenue per available room by 27%. He walked me through the details of bathroom renovations, restaurant expansions, and the new conference facilities that had transformed the Snow Lodge from a regional destination to a property that attracted international guests. Every suggestion had come from my analysis of the hospitality market and my understanding of what luxury travelers expected from mountain resorts.
The private ski access has been particularly popular, James continued. Guests are willing to pay significant premiums for guaranteed powder access and private instruction. Your recommendation to develop those back bowl easements was brilliant. Through the conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows, I could see the main lobby beginning to fill with afternoon arrivals. Guests checking in, families gathering around the massive stone fireplace, children pressing their faces against windows to watch the snow fall outside. James, I said, I should mention that my family will be checking in shortly. They're not aware of my involvement with the property. His expression shifted to one of professional curiosity mixed with personal concern. Should I ask why? Let's just say that family dynamics can be complicated when business success is involved. They prefer to think of me as someone who works too much and misses family events, rather than someone who might have actual influence in the world they move through. James nodded with the understanding of someone who had navigated wealthy family politics for decades. I've seen this before. Sometimes people need to maintain certain narratives about success and independence. Should the staff treat them as regular guests? Exactly. No special treatment, no mentions of my connection to the property, unless they specifically ask. Let them experience the resort exactly as they've booked it. At 4:17, I saw a familiar cluster of designer luggage and winter coats enter the lobby below. Even from 3 floors up, I could recognize my family's travel posture, slightly hunched with exhaustion, moving with the frustrated efficiency of people whose vacation had started badly and was determined to get worse. My father led the group, his usually perfect posture betraying the weariness of nearly 24 hours of travel delays. My mother followed, her cream coat now wrinkled from airport sleeping and her usually immaculate hair showing signs of stress. Camilla and Trevor herded the twins toward the front desk while juggling carry-on bags that had clearly been packed and repacked multiple times. From my elevated position, I could hear fragments of their conversation drifting up through the lobby's open architecture.
"Just get us checked in," Camilla was saying to Trevor. "I need a hot shower and room service." "Boys, stay close," my mother added, trying to maintain control over my nephews who were clearly past their limits for good behavior. My father approached the front desk with the authoritative air of someone accustomed to having problems solved quickly. I watched Jessica, the guest relations manager I'd met the night before, greet them with professional warmth. "Welcome to the Snow Lodge. How may I assist you today?" "Ashworth party. We have reservations, though I'm hoping you might have some upgrades available. It's been a very long travel day." I leaned forward in my chair, interested to see how this would play out. Jessica consulted her computer screen with the kind of focused attention that suggested she was looking for upgrade options. "I see your reservation, Mr. Ashworth. You have 2 adjoining rooms in our Mountain View category. Unfortunately, we're completely booked for the holiday period, so I don't have any availability for upgrades. However, your rooms do have beautiful views of the slopes, and I'd be happy to arrange priority seating for our restaurants if you'd like to make dinner reservations." The disappointment on my family's faces was subtle but visible. They had clearly expected that their arrival story, delayed flights, ruined Christmas, family vacation disaster, would generate some sympathy and special treatment. Instead, they were being processed like any other guests who had booked standard accommodations during peak season. "Are you sure there's nothing available?" Camilla stepped forward, employing the smile that had gotten her out of trouble since childhood. "We've been traveling for almost 24 hours with 2 young children. Even a junior suite would be appreciated." Jessica maintained her professional composure. "I completely understand, and I wish I could accommodate you. The holiday period is always challenging for upgrades. However, I can offer you complimentary late checkout on your departure day, and I'll make sure housekeeping prioritizes your rooms for early service." It was exactly the kind of response any guest in their situation would receive. Polite, apologetic, but ultimately bounded by the reality of hotel capacity during Christmas week. No special favors, no exceptions, no recognition that they might deserve treatment different from any other family dealing with travel delays. James had been watching the scene below with professional interest. He said, "They seem like pleasant people." "They are," I replied. "They're just used to things working out in their favor. And now they're discovering that the world doesn't always accommodate expectations." I watched my family accept their room keys and head toward the elevators, their body language reflecting the accumulated disappointment of a vacation that wasn't going according to plan. They had no idea that the daughter they'd abandoned at an airport was sitting 3 floors above them watching their check-in experience with someone who could have changed their entire stay with a simple phone call. But I didn't make that call. Instead, I let them disappear into elevators that would carry them to rooms that were perfectly adequate, but not exceptional, to accommodations that matched exactly what they had paid for and planned for. "James," I said, standing and gathering my things, "thank you for the update. The property is performing beautifully. Will you be joining them for dinner tonight?"
I considered the question. My family would undoubtedly end up in the main dining room, probably frustrated by the reservation system and the holiday crowds. They would spend the evening dealing with the small indignities that come with budget travel choices during peak season. Meanwhile, I had standing access to the resort's private dining room, the one reserved for advisory board members and VIP guests. I could order from a menu that wasn't available to regular guests, in a space where the service was personal and the ambiance was designed for comfort rather than efficiency. "I think I'll eat privately tonight," I said, "but I'm sure our paths will cross tomorrow." James nodded with understanding. "Family reunions can be complicated. Take your time." As I left the conference room, I realized that the preparation phase was complete. My family was now in my world, experiencing it from the perspective of ordinary guests, while I moved through it with the privileges and recognition that came from my actual position in their ecosystem. Tomorrow would bring the revelation, but tonight they would sleep in standard rooms while I enjoyed the penthouse suite. Both of us finally experiencing the vacation we had actually earned.
Christmas morning at the Snow Lodge dawned with the kind of crystalline clarity that made every surface sparkle like cut gems. I woke naturally at 6:30, feeling more rested than I had in months, and stepped onto my private balcony to watch the sunrise paint the mountain peaks in shades of rose and gold. Room service arrived precisely at 7 with fresh coffee and pastries I hadn't ordered, the kind of anticipatory service that came with being known by a property's management. My family, according to their group chat activity, was having a markedly different morning. Camilla, 7:23 a.m. Kids up at 5:30 asking for presents, trying to explain why Santa's gifts are all back home. Trevor, 7:31 a.m. Room service menu prices are insane. $28 for Eggs Benedict? Seriously? Mom, 7:45 a.m. The coffee maker in our room is broken. Front desk says maintenance can't get to it until after 10. Dad, 7:52 a.m. Breakfast buffet is $65 per person. Highway robbery for a family of 6. Camilla, 8:10 a.m. This place is beautiful, but clearly designed for people with more money than sense. I smiled at that last comment while sipping coffee that had been perfectly prepared by staff who knew exactly how I preferred it. People with more money than sense. If only she knew. I dressed carefully for what I knew would be our inevitable encounter, not in the obvious designer pieces that screamed wealth, but in the kind of understated luxury that whispered it. Cashmere cardigan in soft gray, perfectly tailored black pants, boots that looked simple but cost more than most monthly salaries. The goal wasn't to look rich, it was to look like someone who belonged in spaces where wealth was assumed rather than displayed. At 9:15, I made my way to the main dining room for breakfast. The hostess, Elena, brightened when she saw me approaching. "Miss Ashworth, good morning. Your usual table by the window?" "That would be perfect, Elena, and could you make sure I have a clear view of the main seating area? I'm expecting to see some familiar faces today." She led me to a corner table with panoramic mountain views and sightlines to the entire restaurant. Within minutes, I had fresh orange juice, a fruit plate, and the kind of attentive service that came from being known by a property's management. My family, according to their group chat activity, was having a markedly different morning. Camilla, 7:23 a.m. Kids up at 5:30 asking for presents, trying to explain why Santa's gifts are all back home. Trevor, 7:31 a.m. Room service menu prices are insane. $28 for Eggs Benedict? Seriously? Mom, 7:45 a.m. The coffee maker in our room is broken. Front desk says maintenance can't get to it until after 10. Dad, 7:52 a.m. Breakfast buffet is $65 per person. Highway robbery for a family of 6. Camilla, 8:10 a.m. This place is beautiful, but clearly designed for people with more money than sense. I watched Camilla's face tighten slightly. Premium dining status? What does that mean? It's a recognition program for our VIP guests and advisory board members, Elena explained diplomatically. But I assure you, every table in our restaurant offers an exceptional dining experience. They were led to a perfectly nice table in the center of the restaurant, surrounded by other families dealing with similar vacation realities. From my elevated corner table, I had a clear view of their entire breakfast experience while remaining largely invisible to them. The menu consultation was painful to watch. I could see my father's jaw clench as he reviewed prices that were standard for luxury mountain resorts, but clearly beyond what he'd expected to pay. Trevor was doing quick math on his phone, probably calculating how much this single meal would impact their vacation budget. The twins were restless, still processing the disruption to their Christmas morning routine.
But the moment I'd been both dreading and anticipating came when Camilla looked up from her menu and scanned the restaurant. Her gaze swept across the dining room in that casual way people do when they're people watching, and then suddenly stopped. Her eyes locked on mine across the restaurant. I saw the exact moment of recognition, the slight widening of her eyes, the pause in her conversation, the way she leaned forward slightly as if she couldn't trust what she was seeing. Then she tapped Trevor's arm and pointed in my direction. One by one, my family turned to stare at me sitting alone at what was obviously the best table in the restaurant, being attended to by staff who clearly knew me well, looking completely comfortable in an environment where they were struggling with basic logistics. My father said something to my mother, who immediately began looking around as if trying to understand how I had materialized in their vacation. Trevor pulled out his phone, probably checking the family group chat to see if I had mentioned being in Aspen. Camilla just stared, her expression cycling through confusion, surprise, and something that might have been embarrassment. I raised my coffee cup slightly in their direction, not quite a wave, but an acknowledgement that I had seen them seeing me. That simple gesture broke whatever spell had held them frozen. Camilla said something sharp to Trevor, who immediately stood and began walking toward my table. My father followed, leaving the rest of the family to watch from their seats. "Natalie?" Trevor said as they approached, his voice carrying that forced casualness people use when they're completely confused, but trying to appear in control. "What a surprise. We didn't expect to see you here." "I mentioned I was coming to Aspen, in the group chat, last night." My father looked around the restaurant, taking in the elevated table position, the attentive service, the obvious VIP treatment I was receiving. "How did you manage to get here so quickly and get such a good table?" Before I could answer, Elena appeared beside my table with a fresh pot of coffee and what appeared to be a small plate of pastries I hadn't ordered. "Ms. Ashworth, Chef wanted you to try the new croissants with the honey butter. Also, James called down to confirm your 11 o'clock meeting in the executive dining room." She poured my coffee with practiced precision, completely ignoring Trevor and my father as if they were invisible. It wasn't rudeness, it was the kind of professional focus that came from understanding exactly who paid attention to service quality and who didn't. "Thank you, Elena. The croissants look perfect." After she left, the silence stretched uncomfortably. My father was clearly processing what he'd just witnessed, the casual mention of an executive meeting, the personalized service, the way staff treated me like someone whose comfort mattered to the property's operations. "Executive dining room?" Trevor asked. "Natalie, what exactly is going on here?" I took a sip of my perfectly prepared coffee and looked at them both. These were the men who had stood by while my sister dismissed me at the airport, who had participated in the casual cruelty of leaving me behind, and who had spent 2 days assuming I was struggling with travel problems while they dealt with their own vacation disasters. "I'm having breakfast," I said simply. "The same thing you're doing." "But how did you get here? How did you get this table? Why do the staff know you?" "I flew here Christmas Eve night, about the same time your flight was being delayed in Denver. As for the table and the service, let's just say I'm not exactly a stranger to this property." My father's expression shifted from confusion to something approaching suspicion. "Natalie, are you staying here as a guest, or what, Dad? Or in some other capacity?" I smiled and gestured toward their table, where my mother was clearly struggling to keep the twins entertained, while Camilla watched our conversation with obvious anxiety. "You should probably get back to your breakfast before it gets cold. We can catch up later. I'd love to hear about your travel experience yesterday." It was a dismissal, gentle but unmistakable. Trevor looked like he wanted to ask more questions, but my father placed a hand on his arm. "We'll talk later," my father said, his voice carrying an undertone I hadn't heard since I was a child, and he was trying to figure out whether I had broken something valuable. As they walked back to their table, I could see the intense whispered conversation that immediately erupted. Camilla leaned forward, asking rapid-fire questions that neither man seemed to be able to answer satisfactorily. My mother kept glancing in my direction with an expression that suggested she was beginning to realize that the daughter she thought she knew might be full of surprises. I finished my breakfast slowly, savoring both the food and the sight of my family trying to process what they'd witnessed. When I finally stood to leave, I walked directly past their table. "Enjoy your breakfast," I said pleasantly. "The mountain views from here really are spectacular." Camilla looked up at me with an expression that mixed bewilderment with the first hint of genuine curiosity. "Natalie, how long have you been coming to this place?" "Long enough to know my way around. I'll see you all later." As I walked toward the exit, I heard my father's voice behind me, sharp with realization. That wasn't a coincidence. She knew exactly where we'd be. By the time I reached the elevator, I could hear the beginning of what sounded like a very heated family discussion.
They were finally asking the right questions, finally beginning to understand that the sister and daughter they thought they knew might be someone entirely different. The confrontation wasn't over, it was just beginning. But for the first time in years, they were the ones who were confused, off balance, and trying to figure out how their assumptions had led them so far from the truth. The elevator doors closed behind me, carrying me up to a meeting where I would be treated as the valued business partner I actually was, while they remained downstairs trying to understand how the family dynamic they thought they controlled had just shifted completely out of their grasp. The executive meeting with James Holloway lasted exactly 47 minutes, during which we reviewed quarterly performance metrics, discussed expansion opportunities, and finalized the staff bonus structure for the holiday season. It was the kind of routine business conversation that had become second nature to me over the years, but today it served a different purpose. Every decision I made, every suggestion I offered, every piece of institutional knowledge I demonstrated was building toward a revelation that would fundamentally alter my family's understanding of who I was and what I had become. When the meeting concluded, James walked me to the elevator with the easy familiarity of someone who considered me both a valued colleague and a personal friend. "Natalie, I hope this family situation resolves itself positively," he said as we waited for the elevator. "You've always struck me as someone who chooses reconciliation over revenge. But I also know that family dynamics can be incredibly complex when business success is involved. I think they're going to learn some things about themselves this week. Whether that leads to reconciliation or something else remains to be seen." The elevator doors closed behind me, carrying me up to a meeting where I would be treated as the valued business partner I actually was, while they remained downstairs trying to understand how the family dynamic they thought they controlled had just shifted completely out of their grasp. The executive meeting with James Holloway lasted exactly 47 minutes, during which we reviewed quarterly performance metrics, discussed expansion opportunities, and finalized the staff bonus structure for the holiday season. It was the kind of routine business conversation that had become second nature to me over the years, but today it served a different purpose. Every decision I made, every suggestion I offered, every piece of institutional knowledge I demonstrated was building toward a revelation that would fundamentally alter my family's understanding of who I was and what I had become. When the meeting concluded, James walked me to the elevator with the easy familiarity of someone who considered me both a valued colleague and a personal friend. "Natalie, I hope this family situation resolves itself positively," he said as we waited for the elevator. "You've always struck me as someone who chooses reconciliation over revenge. But I also know that family dynamics can be incredibly complex when business success is involved. I think they're going to learn some things about themselves this week. Whether that leads to reconciliation or something else remains to be seen." The elevator doors opened to reveal my father standing inside, clearly having been waiting to intercept me. His expression carried the focused intensity of someone who had spent the morning piecing together a puzzle and didn't like the picture that was emerging. "Natalie," he said as James and I stepped into the elevator, "I was hoping we could talk." James glanced between us, immediately sensing the tension. "I'll catch the next elevator," he said diplomatically, stepping back into the hallway. As the doors closed, leaving my father and me alone in the small space, I could see him struggling with how to begin a conversation he wasn't sure he wanted to have. "That was James Holloway," he said finally. "Yes. He's the managing partner of Meridian Hospitality Group." "He is." "The company that acquired this resort last year." "Among others, yes." My father was quiet for a moment, processing the implications of what he'd witnessed. "Natalie, what exactly is your relationship with this property?" The elevator reached the lobby level, and I stepped out without answering immediately. My father followed, and I could see that the rest of my family was waiting near the massive stone fireplace, clearly having been sent to watch for my appearance. "Why don't we all sit down?" I said, gesturing toward the comfortable seating area where they had positioned themselves. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation." The next few minutes unfolded with the careful choreography of a family that had suddenly realized they were performing a play where one of the actors had been reading from a completely different script. Camilla sat forward on the edge of her chair, her usual confidence replaced by obvious uncertainty. Trevor kept glancing around the lobby as if seeing it for the first time. My mother maintained her composed exterior, but I could see the questions building behind her careful smile. "You knew we were coming here," Camilla said without preamble. "You knew exactly where we'd booked our vacation." "I did. I've known about your travel plans for weeks." "But you didn't book your own trip until after we left you at the airport," my father said, his tone carrying the first hint of accusation. "Actually, I didn't book a trip at all. I made a phone call." Trevor leaned forward. "What kind of phone call gets you a penthouse suite at a sold-out resort on Christmas Eve?" "The kind you make when you sit on the property's advisory board." The silence that followed was profound. I watched as the implications of that statement settled over each of them in different ways. My father's expression shifted from suspicion to something approaching shock. Camilla looked like someone who had just realized she'd been playing chess while everyone else was playing a different game entirely. "Advisory board," my mother repeated slowly. "Natalie, what does that mean exactly?" "It means that when Meridian Hospitality acquired this resort last year, I was the attorney who structured the deal. It means that many of the improvements you've seen here, the spa expansion, the private ski access, the restaurant renovations, were implemented based on recommendations I made during the acquisition process. It means that I'm not just a guest here. I'm part of the ownership structure." "Part of the ownership," Camilla echoed, her voice barely above a whisper. "How much of a part?" my father asked, his business instincts finally overriding his parental confusion.
I considered how much to reveal, how deep into the rabbit hole of their financial dependence I was willing to take them. In the end, I decided that half-truths had caused enough damage. "I structured the acquisition deal," I said. "I identified the target properties, negotiated the terms, and established the operational frameworks that transformed Meridian from a regional company into a national hospitality group. In exchange for that work, I received equity positions in several properties, including this one." "Equity positions," Trevor repeated, his consulting background finally catching up to the conversation. "You mean you own part of this place?" "I mean, I own enough of this place that staff members know my coffee preferences and the general manager clears his afternoon to meet with me." The revelation hung in the air like smoke from the massive fireplace, visible and undeniable, but still somehow difficult to fully comprehend. I could see each of them trying to reconcile this information with their understanding of who I was and what my role in their family had always been. It was Camilla who finally asked the question I had been waiting for. "If you have this kind of influence, why didn't you help us yesterday? Why did you let us struggle with the delays and the airport hotel and all of that?" I looked at my sister, this woman who had dismissed me so casually just 48 hours earlier, and felt something shift in my chest. Not anger, I was past that. Not satisfaction, this wasn't about winning. It was something cleaner and more final. "Because you made it very clear that my help wasn't wanted," I said simply. "You told me I would figure it out because I'm good at that stuff. You assumed I would catch a later flight and deal with my own problems while you handled yours. So I did exactly what you expected me to do. I figured it out." "But we didn't know," my mother said, her voice carrying the first note of genuine distress I'd heard from any of them. "We didn't know you could..." "Could what, Mom? Could afford to travel on short notice? Could secure accommodations at exclusive resorts? Could handle logistics that seem impossible to everyone else?" I paused, letting the question settle. "Or did you just choose not to know?" My father cleared his throat, falling back on the authoritative tone that had served him well in business, but felt hollow in this context. "Natalie, I think there has been a fundamental misunderstanding about family dynamics here." "I don't think so, Dad. I think the understanding has been very clear.
You've understood me to be the daughter who works too much and misses family events, the one who sends expensive gifts because she feels guilty about not being present, the one who can be counted on to figure things out when problems arise, but who doesn't need to be included in the actual planning or consideration. That's not fair, Camilla protested. We've always included you. Have you? I asked quietly. When did you book this trip, Camilla? 6 weeks ago, she said defensively. And when did you mention it to me? We talked about it at lunch, at the club. You mentioned that you were planning a family ski trip. You didn't invite me until I specifically asked to join, and even then, you acted like it was a tentative possibility rather than a definite plan. The accuracy of this recollection was written across her face. She had treated my participation as an unlikely variable rather than a desired outcome. And when I confirmed 3 weeks ago that I could come, what did you do? I thought you were being optimistic. You always have work things that come up. So you didn't book me a seat on your flight. You didn't include me in your reservations. You didn't plan for my actual presence, just for the possibility that I might show up and figure out my own arrangements. Trevor shifted uncomfortably in his chair. Natalie, you have to understand that your schedule has always been unpredictable. We've planned family events around you before and then had you cancel at the last minute. Exactly, I said. So you stopped planning around me at all, which I understand. But you also stopped considering me at all. There's a difference between planning flexibly and planning as if someone doesn't exist. My mother reached for my hand, a gesture that might have felt comforting if it hadn't come 2 days too late. Sweetheart, we never meant to make you feel excluded. I know you didn't mean to, I said gently. That's what makes it worse. Intentional cruelty would have been a choice. This was just indifference. The lobby around us continued its holiday bustle. Families checking in, children excited about skiing, couples planning romantic dinners. Normal vacation conversations happening around us, while my family processed the revelation that their understanding of our relationships had been fundamentally flawed. So what happens now? My father asked, his voice carrying the weight of someone who had built his identity around being the family patriarch and was suddenly realizing that someone else had been quietly handling the structural support. Now you have the vacation you planned, I said, standing up from my chair. You check out on the day you booked, you pay the rates you agreed to, and you experience the resort as the guests you are. No upgrades, no special treatment, no interventions from the daughter you left at the airport.
And you? Camilla asked. I'll be here for another few days. James wants to review the expansion plans for the spa facilities, and I promised to look at the feasibility studies for the new conference center. The casual mention of ongoing business responsibilities seemed to hit them harder than the ownership revelation had. This wasn't just about having enough money to buy influence. This was about being integrated into systems and relationships that existed completely outside their knowledge or understanding. Will we see you? My mother asked, her voice small. I'm sure we'll run into each other, I said. It's not a large property. I walked away from them then, not dramatically or angrily, but with the calm purpose of someone who had said what needed to be said and was ready to move forward. Behind me, I could hear the beginning of what sounded like a very intense family discussion, voices low but urgent, the kind of conversation that happens when people realize they need to fundamentally reassess their assumptions. 3 days later, as my family checked out of their standard rooms and loaded their luggage into the resort shuttle for the airport, I was sitting in the executive dining room with James Holloway and the resort's head architect, reviewing blueprints for a new wing that would add another 40 luxury suites to the property. Through the window, I watched their shuttle disappear down the mountain road, carrying them back to their lives with a new understanding of who I was and what I had become while they weren't paying attention. My phone buzzed with a text from Camilla. "We need to talk when you get back to the city. Really talk." I looked at the message for a long moment, then put the phone aside and returned to the blueprints. Some conversations could wait. Some relationships could be rebuilt. But first, I had work to do. The kind of work that had made me who I was, while they were busy deciding who they thought I should be. The mountain view from the executive dining room was spectacular, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I belonged. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.